So there's 7 people on so far. Hi guys, we're going to give it a couple minutes just to let some people come on, and then we will kick off the webinar for Dev Office Hours. Thanks. Hi there, can you hear us? Srini, I saw your comment. Okay, great. We're just going to give it maybe 1 more minute. There's a handful of, there's a couple dozen people on so far, but just in case there's a couple more trickling in. Please feel free to post in the chat, post in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those just throughout the conversation in case you can't see anything. Hi, Paul from London. Good to see you again. I like to see the consistent community members coming back every week. Okay, so I'm going to get started. First, my name is Amanda Boyle. I'm the community manager here at Tableau. Welcome to Dev Office Hours. I've written down some notes. This is a chance for our community to connect with members of the Tableau development team. And it's really exciting because we have such talented people that work here. It's really fun to bring everybody together to share conversations about the things that we're doing here at Tableau. So upcoming sessions for Dev Office Hours, we have Maps with Kent Martin, and then Biz and Tooltips with Jin Sun. All of these are recorded each week and then posted onto the forums. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for future sessions, please just post those in the forums. But now I'm going to pass it over to Rahul and his team, and thank you for joining us. Okay, it's all you. I'm passing you. It goes. Okay. There.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Motwani, and I'm a product manager here at Tableau. So we'll be walking through part 2 of the series on server admin tools. We will be covering Tabmon, LogShark, and Tableau Log Viewer. So with me today is Dan Ram. He is the developer on Tabmon. We also have Justin, who is a developer on LogShark. And then we have Dimitri, who's in our Kirkland office, who is the developer on Tableau Log Viewer. And I'm Rahul, product manager. So a quick overview of the agenda. I'll quickly walk you through why we developed some of these tools here at Tableau. I'll then go through the support levels for these tools, and then we'll dive in deep into each of these tools. So we'll go over Tabmon first, followed by LogShark, and then Tableau Log Viewer. And then we'll give you a quick summary of all these tools, and it has a bunch of links to various resources for each of these tools. It's just meant as like a good information kind of slide for you to kind of overview after the call is done. So why do we develop these tools at Tableau? We realize that Tableau is a pretty complex and compound product, and we touch a huge customer base, from really small enterprises all the way to really large enterprises. And so we acknowledge the fact that there are very customer needs across our customer base. We have developed almost all of these tools. Initially were developed internally because we used them to troubleshoot issues that we were seeing on our internal environment, as well as to troubleshoot some of the customer issues that were reported by all of you. And since we've used them and we realized the benefit of them, we wanted to share this customer benefit with you as well. We also want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the use cases and scenarios where we use these tools very extensively and highlight those so that you can understand which tool do you use under which circumstances. The other big proponent, or the big reason why we have these tools, is we firmly believe in the policy of enabling our customers to self-service some of their issues. And so these tools kind of complement your Tableau server installation and give you the ability to solve some of your issues without having to contact Tableau technical support. And we believe that creates a good customer experience for you. And lastly, but by no means the least, a lot of these tools do use Tableau to showcase some of the data, and we firmly believe this is a great use of Tableau for all of you. So all of these enterprise tools are outlined on our website, and I will quickly show you where. And these links will be there in the slide deck for you to look at. So if you go to the Enterprise IT tool site, you will see that we've categorized all of the tools under different categories. So we have deployment, platform and management, load testing, scalability, and you can look at all of them. So you can look under each of these categories for the tools. And then we have two support levels for these tools. They basically fall under the community supported category and the Tableau supported category. The primary distinction between community supported and Tableau supported is that community supported tools are not supported by Tableau technical support, which means you cannot contact them to troubleshoot any of the issues. However, we have a very strong community support for these tools, whereby you can post your issues to the Tableau community site, as well as to the issue site on the GitHub forum. And we actively monitor these issues and try to get back to you as soon as possible. A lot of the APIs sort of fall under the Tableau supported category, and these are supported by Tableau technical support, so you can contact them in open support cases. For more details around each of these support levels and what it means, I encourage you to look at the definitions of these categories on the website and kind of see where each of these tool sets fall. There's one more resource I wanted to highlight is the community site. So we have the server and online administration forum. Please use this forum to post any questions or issues that you run into when you're using these tools. Like I said, we actively monitor this and try to give you a quick turnaround on these issues. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan to start the discussion around Tabmon.
Awesome, thanks, Rahul. So as Rahul mentioned, my name is Dan. I'm one of the primary devs on Tabmon. And so this is just a brief overview of what Tabmon is and what we use it for. So first off, what it does. So Tabmon goes through and monitors the performance counters for the host that you have Tableau server installed on, as well as the JMX counters that Tableau server exposes to the customers as long as you go through and you have the correct config settings set. We go through and we gather all this information and we store this in Postgres, so that way we can go through and we can analyze this using Tableau. So it's a very Tableau-friendly data source. We do bundle it with a group of sample workbooks, that way you can go through and you can have a good jumping off point for it, but we really encourage that you go and actually look at the data source itself. And so how does this actually benefit you guys? Well, it lets you go through and do this high-level analysis, a high-level host analysis, I would say, actually. So be able to go through and look at the hosts that you have everything installed on, so you know how everything's operating, whether or not the performance is where you'd like it to be, whether it's scaled correctly, that sort of stuff. It also allows you to look at scalability, and you can put some metrics behind your scalability, because sometimes it seems a little arbitrary when you're going through and trying to scale out a system for 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. The last thing is it lets us go through and really just monitor our outages and our historical data. So anytime we see something break or something is not operating right, we can go through and we can look at the performance of our hosts to see what's going on and whether or not we see something that we expect or if it's something that we don't expect. So let's just get into a quick overview of how Tabmon works. So Tabmon is installed preferably on its own machine. You can install it on a Tableau server host. We just prefer not to do that because we don't want the operation of Tabmon to ever affect the performance of Tableau server. And there's one of two things that we can do with this. We can either go through and we can write Tabmon data out to a CSV that's stored locally on the Tabmon host, or we can go through and we can write to a database that's either installed on the same machine as Tabmon or installed on a separate machine. One thing I'd like to point out is please never go through and insert Tabmon data into the Tableau server repository. That's bad. You would definitely go through and slow Tableau server down. So once everything's installed like that, Tabmon will go through and it will remotely pull the perfmon and the JMX counters from all of the Tableau server nodes and potentially clusters if you go through and you actually enable cluster control. All right, so the couple questions that are generally get after this is, where do we get Tabmon? In order to get Tabmon, we just have it up on GitHub. There's a quick download link under the releases. It has some good documentation. We also have a forum up there so you can ask questions and whatnot when we work through issues. And back to rules, how supported is this? Well, it's community supported, so that means we have the actual Tableau forums that you can go on and you can post questions to, but we also have the GitHub issues page that you can ask questions to. I tend to troll the GitHub issues page. I try to get on there every couple of weeks. So we also try to pool our resources together and solve problems together. Now for a quick demo, correct? Cool. All right, so I just wanted to jump into a quick workbook that I put together for just like looking at whether or not a system is scaled properly. I will note that I way overscaled the system and I had like 5 people on it, so we're going to see very little use on it. But this is the actual landing page that we see. If you're connected to live Postgres data and Tabmon data at the same time, you actually get some really cool functionality out of this. And what I mean by that is you can go through and highlight these points. Let's say we get a bunch of spikes here, we can highlight in on there, and we'll actually go through and we will query the repository to see, you know, what might be happening at that time, and we can actually drill into these specific events to go and see what resources we're using. So the first bit basically just tells you, you know, how's my CPU doing, what might be causing any spikes that we see, and then you can drill in a little bit to see what was happening in the repository at that time. So pretty cool if you just want to one-off, just a quick glance at how that system's going. The next major sheet in here, sheets actually have to do with the CPU utilization. And so most of them just go through and look at the total utilization, the queue length, and then if we jump into here, the average CPU utilization by host. And we tend to break everything down by the actual Tableau server, the Tableau services. And so you can see that in this case, backgrounder is pretty much the only thing that's ever running on this. And that makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, this is a pretty, this is a very, very large environment for how many people we have on it. So you don't see a lot of activity as far as, you know, SQL server and whatnot goes, but you can see the backgrounder running to go through and do all of our background tasks that keep us up and running. The next couple sheets that we see here are actually for memory. And we tend to go through and look at the actual available memory by host. So this doesn't really break down any usages by process in this sheet, but we're just looking at the total host metrics. And so in this case, you can see that we have a lot of available memory. Nothing is spiking to something that makes us uncomfortable. So we're looking good here. The next, let this load. The next is where we actually start getting into the actual by service memory utilization. And here, yet again, you'll see that most everything is pretty low, but we'll get a fairly constant memory pressure from our actual backgrounder. Like I said, this is perfectly normal considering the fact that we had, you know, 10 people on this maybe concurrently. The next sheet is network I/O. And so if we look at network I/O, we're just going to see basically the average bytes written and read, or sent and received. And so we'll just see this. Yet again, we tend to do this all by host. That way you know whether or not we are, maybe uploading something huge or downloading or, something along that nature. We'll move on to disk.io. And so disk.io, yet again, is just how fast we are reading and writing from disk. We can go through and we can see whether or not our queue length is anything significant or anything that might be causing any issues in Tableau. And in this case, we're all green, so we don't really have any lengths that worry us. So these last sheets that I showed you guys, I didn't mention, all of them were using the actual perfmon counters, so none of this was JMX data. So from this point on, we're going to actually get into the JMX stuff that Tableau server actually goes through and exposes. So the next sheet will be cache hits and misanalysis. And what we're able to see here is just a spike in cache hits. And that's pretty much everything we see here. We can see the actual in-process query cache. So whenever you go through and you're hitting the cache for a specific query, the external cache, the visual model, and then the actual image cache. And so as we get usage, you see we get more and more caching and more cache hits. And then when we have very little usage, we see almost no cache hits. Moving on, we have concurrent users. This one, for scalability specifically, is very useful. Part of the reason it's useful is because we can go through and we can actually see logins, how many there were per, in this case, the bucket is every 5 minutes. And then we can see active sessions. Looking here, you can see that, we have, I would say, 10 or so logins at once. So, like I said, fairly light load on this environment, but we can see that we have 10, and then we do have an increase in the actual active sessions. One thing I'd like to point out about the active sessions view is that we do see negative values in this, and what that means is if you have one active session within a 5-minute session, and you have 2 sessions that are cleared or deleted or end, you'll actually get a negative value on that. So that's just showing you the delta between sessions within that timestamp. And the last page we have in here is just our SQL bootstrap activity. And so what a bootstrap is every time you go through and you load a view in Tableau server, you get what's called a bootstrap. It's basically starting your session, loading all of your data, performing all the queries, rendering all the images, and passing back what we all know as the Tableau bits. So right now we are actually in an active bootstrap. So this is an active session right now. So this is all bootstrapped for us. And so that just shows, the activity that you would expect for users when they're using this. So, how many views you're seeing at once. And yet again, we break it down by host, and then we break it down by the actual SQL server process. So we know whether or not we're hitting one process harder than the other, one host harder than the other. So that's basically just the example workbook that we have set up for this. It's really just a quick way to ask your questions and give you a jumping off point in answering them. The nice thing about it is because it gives you that jumping off point, when you have your own questions, you can go and dig into the data yourself. Cool. So that's just a quick overview of Tableau. So I'm now going to pass this off to Justin.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, so who's ready to get pumped about some logs, server logs? I know I am. As any of you who have had to troubleshoot Tableau server know, Tableau server logs a lot of data. And in trying to help many of you with your support cases, here at Tableau, we end up analyzing a lot of this data. So we built LogShark as a means to visualize basically a Tableau log set. So the basic premise of LogShark is Tableau log set goes in, Tableau workbooks come out. And we look for a set of known patterns using kind of a sequence of analytical processes called plugins. So it's a plugin-based architecture to basically build a bunch of Tableau workbooks. As an admin, we've released this to you because we think it could be useful for you to help and identify error conditions in your server, possibly find performance bottlenecks or query tuning improvements that could be made, and also analyze background activity on your server. We also understand that many of you, for corporate policy, are not allowed to share your logs with Tableau, so we wanted to release LogShark in an attempt to help you self-service, which here at Tableau we're all about. LogShark can also be used to basically build a set of benchmark data so that when you take an upgrade or make a configuration change to your server, you can go through and validate that what you see is a net improvement in performance or error rate rather than a degradation. All right, so as with Tabmon, LogShark is available free on GitHub and is a community-supported tool, so we monitor the forums there to try to answer any questions. You will need, as with Tabmon, a Postgres database to get started, separate from Tableau Server's Postgres database. And if you're processing particularly large log sets, you'll also probably want to set up a Mongo database just to help process those a little quicker. For smaller log sets under 2 gigabytes or so, LogShark does come bundled with a standalone Mongo database that it runs on the fly for processing. Cool, so I'm not going to go through actually running LogShark, but essentially once you have it configured, and we have a really great user guide on how to set it up, it's a command line tool. So you can generate a Tableau server zip logs, and then you can run LogShark on that zip logs to produce your workbooks. So I'm going to just dive straight into the workbooks and skip the boring command line text flying across the screen part. And we'll just take a look at some of the output. So we do reconstruct the server topology using the config files. Probably not super useful for you as an admin, but here at Tableau, it helps our support team really understand what kind of server they're working with. This next view here is built by reconstructing the data from the Apache logs, Apache being kind of the associated with the gateway process in Tableau Server. So what we're seeing here in this request help bootstrap session is basically the wall clock time that it takes your users from the time they try to load a viz to the time the viz is actually rendered and available for them to view. So this is a really great benchmark of like how long are my users waiting. This is a server-wide view, so we see a really nice aggregation of the top workbooks that have been requested on the server. If I click on one of these, if I want to see how Whiterun sales year over year is performing, I see that it's pretty good. The average load time was 1.6 seconds. I don't have any huge outliers. The longest anyone had to wait was 14 seconds. I can also see any errors associated with that session. So I do see I had some 400 errors associated with this workbook. So that's potentially something that I would want to go investigate. And by drilling down on the data here, I could get a little closer to actually go and search the logs to find exactly these points of interest. Okay, so another workbook that LogShark outputs in a similar vein for you to leverage is this request performance heat map. And again, I can drill this down to a particular workbook here. And actually, let's just stick with all for now. So here I can see basically how my server is doing in relation to a threshold I set. So maybe I've determined that for a particular workbook, I want 7 seconds to be the amount of time that a user considers a healthy load time. Well, I can see like in relation to that threshold, we're actually not doing too well. We actually see like we're frequently in the red where loads are taking more than 28 seconds. So again, using this, I can drill down a bit and begin to troubleshoot a little more. Another workbook that we built here is based on a Tableau process that's called the Server Resource Manager. And this is basically a watchdog process that runs on your server that if any process kind of runs amok and uses too much memory or CPU for too long a time, it will kill that process to free up the resources so that your server isn't negatively impacted for too long. And one of the nice things about this process on server is that it continually logs out what it's seeing in terms of CPU and memory utilization. So using LogShark, we're actually able to piece all these events back together, and we get a nice kind of for free host level monitoring just out of the logs alone. So if we take a look here, the red lines represent the threshold at which Server Resource Manager will kick in and kill a process. So we see on CPU on the left here, on all three workers, we're pretty okay. We do come close to hitting that threshold on worker one. But on memory, we seem to have a slow increase over time. And this sheet at the bottom actually shows us exactly when a process was terminated by the Server Resource Manager. And if I hover, I can see why. So we see that here on September 25th, we had a process killed for exceeded global memory utilization threshold. So this process was cycled to free up RAM. And if I happened to be a user who was interacting with a viz at that time, I would see the dreaded session ended by server error. So if any of you have ever gotten that horrible email from your boss on Monday morning saying, hey, I was looking at my sales viz and I saw a session ended by server, what gives? This is a possible cause of that, and would be a good way to identify that. This same workbook does break down that aggregated data by process. So if we drill down here, we can now actually see exactly which process was consuming the most RAM. And again, we see that BizQL server number 0 on worker 1. So we have some kind of memory leak here in this cluster that we need to address as the admin. We'll go through just a couple of more quick examples. LogShark does generate about 10 workbooks currently, and we're adding more all the time. So there's a lot to look through, and I'd encourage you to run the tool and check it out. This is another performance-oriented dashboard. In this case, it's looking at the cluster controller logs, which log out disk I/O metrics. And we can see our disk queue lengthened over time. Disk queue length basically being the number of operations to the disk that are waiting in line at any given moment. And we can see that we have a couple red spots, particularly on worker 1. So we have some periods of high queuing, healthy queuing usually being under 2 is the rule of thumb I've always heard. We have, in some instances, this is going over 6, which is going to impact performance on my server. So as an admin, I might take this information and look at possibly rescheduling or rebalancing this workload to the other workers, which don't have as much going on. And the final workbook I wanted to show was backgrounder utilization. So this is a chart showing basically run times of jobs in backgrounder. We see that on this particular server, the schedule is really packed. Like there's almost no available time for any new jobs to happen. And in fact, this view at the bottom shows us how long other jobs are waiting to run. So bump this up a little bit, you can see. We see that on average on our cluster, each background job is waiting an hour to run. So as a server admin, this means that extracts are going to be generated more slowly. Subscriptions are going to be delayed going out. So looking at this viz, I can quickly ascertain, hey, I need to either reschedule things and adjust my schedule, or maybe I just need to add more background processes. So again, I'd encourage you just to get in and get dirty and check out your data here with LogShark. And if there's any questions at the end, I'd love to hear them. But for now, I'm going to pass this back to Rahul. Or I guess to
Dimitri.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So Dimitri is going to walk you through the last of the tool sets, which is Tableau Log Viewer. Yes.
All right.
From the slide point of view, I'm gonna get, well, we have basically same 2 slides as for every other tool, how the tool is used and where you can get it, but probably gonna be easier just for me to walk through this with you. I'm gonna share my screen, and let's dive into this. Okay, so differences with the tool I'm gonna present and the other two that we just saw is, I'm not gonna have any visuals for you. So just not what it is. And differences with the other tools is Tabmon and LogShark are more like a top-down type of tools, where you look at the server and you just take a look at how it performs, and then you start to dive in. The Tableau Log Viewer was created by developers for the developers, and it's coming from the people that working on back end of our product, mostly the query processing and the connectivity layers. And you can kind of see that it's coming from there. So we also on GitHub, the landing pages here, releases where you can download the tool are also here. There's this tiny little wiki page where you can take a look what the tool is for and a couple of key features, but let me just show you what it is. So it's, as it's coming from a backend developers, we're very focused on the really tiny things in terms of how the component of our product performs. And in this case, we typically work with a desktop or with a backend layer that's kind of shared between a desktop and a server or any other kind of internal tools that we have. So just to show an example, so here I have a Tableau Log Viewer open, so it's an empty view. And one of scenarios that I use it a lot is to see what Tableau is doing. So here I have a Tableau open. I'm gonna go ahead and talk with Log Viewer, open log.txt. As you might know, the log.txt is the main log file that Tableau creates for itself. And I'm gonna open this log in the live mode, which is basically a tailing of a file. And what it does is I can go in Tableau, I can do something, and a log viewer will start spitting out the events that we're reading. I typically focus on the very particular parts of the Tableau. And Tableau Log Viewer helped me with that, with its collection of filtering and highlight tools. I have this nice dialog where you can specify events or strings you wanna highlight or find. It's a multi-tab where you can find many things at the same time and highlight. And what's great about it, I can say, show me everything that's highlighted. So I work on queries a lot, and here I can see what are all the queries that were issued when some certain things. For example, go to our is, and it's going against the big extract, render. I can figure out what's going to happen if I replace one field with the other. What action happens here? And here I see it's issuing this sort of query. And I can click through, and I see what all the queries that were issued in this particular field. Very interactive. It removes a lot of noise. Typically, when you do work with log files, I'm going to show you an example. This is what you get if you just looking at the regular tools. And this sort of view, which is scaring, was the reason of log viewer creation, where you can just see in a nice tabular format what are the events, what are the timings, and when do they happen. A couple of features that I want to highlight is we extracting the elapsed column, which is very useful when you troubleshooting certain issues. For example, here I can clearly see what are my long running queries. So there are a bunch of queries that are under a second, a couple of queries were lasting a couple of seconds. There's also a mode in the time column where I can show time deltas. So I can see the time between the first query and the last query was about a minute. So it's all the pauses that I made. When it comes to server troubleshooting, for me, it's used a lot. For example, if I want to analyze the vSQL server. So I'm gonna drag it in. So by default, it looks like this. In my particular workflow, I can kind of focus on very specific things. And I already, working with this tool, identified a couple of collection of highlights or collection of filters that I typically use. So in this case, I want to focus on the query and the connectivity. So it's going to highlight me a bunch of stuff. I'm going to hide everything that I'm not interested in. And I can see that, oh, a lot of activity happened. If I click on right click on the column header, I can expose a little bit more columns. For example, user and the session. Here I can see that I had 2 users coming in and doing activity on the vSQL server. So I have a Bob and Maggie doing stuff, and I can see that, oh, Bob connected to Hyper. So it's probably reading something from the extract, and I can go and see what did Maggie connect to. I can see that Maggie was connecting to Redshift. So I can start slicing and dicing what people are doing and what they're connecting to and how do their queries perform. If, for example, I want to look at the background activity, I'm going to drag it in. Allow me. No. Do it. And I have, again, the filter saved up for this, which is Hyper Extract. I'm going to highlight, and I can see a bunch of events that I already predetermined that I care about, which is, okay, there's a begin full extract refresh for a certain session if you want to find it out through another tool like LogShark or Tableau. So I had a begin full extract refresh. I inserted a couple of, ran a couple of queries, and there are some more details in what happened. So I can see extract took me 20 seconds. So just to summarize, this is basically a tool that we use to focus on the very specific things, on very specific flows on individual files. The highlight option, which allows you to predetermine your basically workloads or areas of focus, is very handy. The monitor of log files in live mode through either desktop on the server where you can see activity as it happens. For me, it's personally a great study tool when I want to see if I do X in Tableau, what does it actually do? Whether it's running queries, whether it's performing certain actions, whether it's calling certain commands, I can see all that in real time as it happens. Yeah, that's the high level. Go use it, send us feedback, and request some features. I'm gonna pass the ball back.
Cool. Thanks, Dimitri. And with that, on the host side.
So thank you for everyone who has stayed on for the call and submitted questions. I know you were asking when specific people were presenting on different topics, so we're going to go back to the start of the questions and then filter those through for the team. One question that came in early on was suggested improvement for Tableau, add cluster as a filter on your dashboard. I'm monitoring both production and dev, so any thoughts on that?
I think that's been requested before. Next iteration or next time I jump into it, that's probably something that I'm going to do because that doesn't take me too long to add to the work, but awesome.
Yeah, and if you guys ever have ideas or thoughts on specific product changes you'd like to see happen across Tableau, feel free to go into the forums, the ideation forums, and that space, because everything's ranked in there, votes are collected, and that actually gets fed back to the dev team. So that's a great place to go.
As far as Tableau goes, if you guys go onto the actual GitHub page and go to the issues, you can submit that as an issue, and I can mark that as feature request, and that way when I'm doing that and going and making edits to the product itself, I can go through and add those.
Next question, where can we find the deck from this week and last week? So those will actually be posted. Last week was posted on the forums page, and then it was also the recording and the deck from last week, as will this recording and this deck be posted there as well. And then I can email a link out to everyone who registered for today. Next question was, are the timestamps in these tools UTC or TS server time zones?
So as far as Tableau goes, anything that we go through and scrape from Percmon will be collected from the host itself that it's running on. So that just means that if you're running in UTC, then it'll be UTC. If not, it'll just be whatever local time you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for LogShark, it just depends on the timestamp that was in the logs. Not all the log files in Tableau server, unfortunately, log the offset. So we don't always know. So we just store out the raw timestamp uncorrected.
And then there was a suggestion to add cluster to reports and friendly name of machine versus IP only.
Okay. Yet again, just add that to the issues pages. That way it'll always be visible to me.
Awesome. One of the things I had hoped that LogShark did was give me insight to the queries that were being executed against my database. I ended up writing some Python code to parse this info out in the BizQL server logs.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So we actually do have a plugin in LogShark that will parse out the query data. It does not run by default, but it's called BizQL Server Performance. And if you run that plugin, and it's really slow because it is gathering a lot of data, and the BizQL logs are very large. But if you run that plugin, there are a couple dashboards that come out in the resulting workbook that will show you kind of like a waterfall diagram of when queries ran and show you the query text and how many rows and columns they touched. And then there's also, similar to the request performance heat map that I showed, there's also kind of a query performance helper dashboard that comes out as well. So that would definitely be a good way to go. If you only care about the query data, then parsing either your Python tool or using Tableau Log Viewer to look for the query end events is a great low-cost way to get that data out.
His response is cool.
Cool.
And I'd like to welcome Mark. He's a brand new Tableau Zen Master. It's exciting to see you on here. Thanks. And then from Hans, he says, great question, Mark. I would like to know on a higher level, when sessions hit the cache or queries, which hit the underlying database?
I would love to answer that, and you can pass me the host. I can actually show some of the things in the log.
Okay. Dimitri, you should have it now.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to go away. When it comes to caches, so as you probably know, we have multiple level of caches. The terms we're using, one is abstract and one is literal. It's basically when we have an internal representation of the query, it's called the abstract. So we have not compiled the text for it yet. We just know we need this data is going to come from there. The second one is literal, which is we have to actually get to the and compile a query, which is create a SQL text for it, and we might find another cache for it. There is one particular event that might be interesting for this purpose, which is QP batch summary, which is query pipeline batch summary. So there's a certain component in Tableau that collects the queries for a dashboard and then figures out what to run and when to run. And at the end, it logs this nice batch summary that basically let me actually show you it in here. That we have here, for example, at the beginning we have a batch of 5 queries. At the end of it, we had 5 jobs, and you can drill down a bit, and you can see the cache hit non-abstract, abstract, and you can drill down a bit further what it actually means. So, for example, something like this. There was an abstract query, it was compiled, it was executed, and it took 0.2 seconds. But if you go a bit lower for the abstract one, there was a query that was abstract. We never compiled it, so we never created a text for it, and it took 0.08 seconds. This is one of the ways to figure out a cache hit versus not a cache hit. In the real life, we really rarely have literal query caches, basically when you can actually tell that you compiled this query, you created text for it, but you never ran. Most of the times we hit our abstract cache. It might be a little bit complicated to understand what didn't run unless you know how to read this sort of XML, which is kind of our internal representation of the query. When we say, okay, we want to get this event, we want to return this value, and there's some sort of filter specified. Yes, you can definitely try. That's caches.
Great, thank you. So we have a question. Can you please state how Tableau is different from LogShark? I missed the first part of the presentation.
Yeah, cool. So Tableau is basically meant to go through and collect host performance metrics, both host performance metrics and the actual Tableau server JMX metrics. While LogShark is basically host consumption for the logs. You want to step into that a little bit, Justin?
Yeah, so if you think of Tableau as basically a service that's running continuously, asking all your worker nodes, like
how they're doing,
how hard are you working? LogShark is instead taking a log snapshot, so it's fixed at a point in time, and it's processing it to kind of reconstruct a lot of data about what happened in that log snapshot. So it's kind of like live capture versus fixed point in time analysis, and then also performance, raw host performance metrics versus log data.
I'd just like to add on to that. It's probably the same thing, but when I try to explain it, I sort of say like, oh, Tableau gives you a good like 10,000 foot view of how your installation is doing, and then when you kind of hone in on like a particular time slice, when you're seeing performance degradation, you probably want to then take logs from that time slice and then run that through LogShark to then start debugging at a more detailed level of what exactly is causing that performance degradation. So it's sort of like complementary tool sets.
Great. Do we have any more questions? We're getting close to the end of time here. Great. Well, we want to thank everyone for joining. If you have any more questions, please do put them in. But this session, along with the recording, the slide deck, everything will be uploaded to the community forum. And then we will be sending updates to everyone on subsequent sessions for Dev Office Hours for the rest of the spring, or the start of spring, actually. So thank you so much for joining. For everyone on the server admin team who helped us today, come and do a Dev Office Hour session. And Dimitri says, thank you all for attending. Spread the knowledge. We encourage you to share this with your coworkers, with your teams. This will be recorded, so please refer back to it. And thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.